Hi everyone, my name is Austin Zollner and this is my case study on ethics and law for AEP 855. So to summarize the case study that we all looked at, the main people involved were Richard Inman, the AP, David, who was a repeat offender, James, who was a model student, the school police officer, the director of secondary education, and the parents of those said students, David and James. This event took place in around fifth period in the hallway at Rocket Junior High, and mhm, the actual addressing of the issue took place in the assistant principal's office. In terms of specifics, there were brass knuckles forcibly exchanged in the hallway, and the teacher thought it was a drug exchange. So the teacher saw this and reported it to the AP, Richard Inman, and called the boys down. After a little bit of discussion, it was found out that David had forced James to take it, but this called into question the zero tolerance policy of brass knuckles and weapons like that. The AP decides to follow the expulsion policy, the 45-day policy for David, but not for James, the model student. The director of secondary education informs him that he must follow through on the expulsion paperwork for James, or else an official reprimand will be placed in his file. So in terms of legal and ethical issues, the police officer is legally doing his job in arresting both of them, and just reminds the AP that, hey, there's a zero tolerance policy. That's what is required. They have to go to the alternative learning program for the district. Legally, David bullied James into holding onto the brass knuckles. The AP may be legally liable for not addressing the bullying that was happening to James from David. And that would be a breach of contract in complying with the zero tolerance policy. However, there is no federal policy against not following or filing disciplinary paperwork. In terms of the contravening of existing law, the school doesn't address the harassment done by David. They're in violation of Title IX, Section 504, IDEA, and many more. However, on the flip side, not filing paperwork for disciplining these students does not violate these at all. In terms of ethical harm and ethical issues, there's a clear power imbalance as David bullied James. If the policy is being followed, this zero tolerance policy, James is being punished for essentially being bullied and not sticking up for himself. There would be further harm to David's future due to the zero tolerance and expulsion policy if followed through, as well as James's future in education may be in jeopardy for something that he essentially did nothing wrong for, from my perspective. So to synthesize in this case study, the assistant principal is stuck between filing expulsion papers for an honor student who was bullied and not filing it. And if he doesn't file, he will be punished with an official reprimand in his file. And especially being a first-year principal, that would not bode well for his career. So again, to synthesize the facts, a lot of these are very similar from what I just talked about a couple slides ago. So we have the assistant principal, David, James, the police officer, the director of secondary ed, and the parents. The program that's in question is the zero tolerance policy towards weapons. This likely is taking place in an urban public school, Rocket Junior High. And when they say expulsion, they are referring to DAPE, the District Alternative Education Program, and not what a lot of people think of as expulsion, as like you can't go to school at all, and being forbidden from attending school. Again, this took place fifth period in the hallway at this likely urban public school, as there's mentioned, to the south side of town. So reviewing and prioritizing information. There are a lot of stakeholders here, and this is not a simple, there's a right answer and a wrong answer. The parents would be thankful that an administrator is willing to look at all the facts. The District of Secondary Education would be displeased that a new hire would go against the policy if he doesn't end up filing. The school police officer would probably feel marginalized and upset that, the school police officer thinks, okay, I'm doing my job, why are you not doing yours? Community members would probably be pleased that an administrator is showing compassion and understanding and taking into context all of the information of the situation. The assistant principal does have to decide if just a simple note in his file, even though it's official, if that is worth doing, if he knows it's ethically the right thing to do. So to learn more, there are a couple questions we do need to keep in mind, and that would be, when was the zero tolerance policy created? Who created it? What research backed this decision or this policy? And how outdated might that be? How can the policy be changed to be more flexible and forgiving, and taking into consideration all of these various nuances of situations? And is there a building leadership team established? Because that would be a very core principle of building a new policy that is more up to date. However, there is, I would say, enough information based on the fact that you're in education to do what is best for the child. The ethically correct choice is clear, especially because there are always exceptions being made for policies in the realm of education. So there are quite a few different options and consequences that go along with each of them. So we have simply doing nothing, what the case study was kind of implying. Not submitting the paperwork, James would be able to move past it and move on, have a great, likely academic career, and the AEP would get an official reprimand in his file. He could charge both students, and that would show that he's willing to follow the district policies and go and do decisions that might not always be the easiest. He could create a new policy that replaces zero tolerance, especially because there was no action that actually took place with the brass knuckles, and it was a threat made out that was going to happen outside of the school day. He could possibly give David a metaphorical slap on the wrist and explain, okay, if this happens again, you will go and get that 45-day expulsion. However, in doing this, the AP would likely receive a harsher reprimand because he's going directly, like a completely opposite direction for the current zero tolerance policy. Another option is to ask the superintendent their input and ask why the policy is in place. And that does really speak volumes about the district as a whole. If the superintendent is very like, we do it this way, it's always been done this way, and shows no flexibility, it kind of speaks about the school climate that this AP is getting himself into. Another option is to go to the school board about their reasons for the policy, because they might not really know what a zero tolerance policy is and the consequences that it has on students that are caught under this one size fits all umbrella. And just sort of talking about the treatment of students would definitely be a good way to go about that. Ideally, this situation would cause the school district to revamp the zero tolerance policy, and that is something that the AP could lead the charge on. So in terms of evaluating the options, in terms of pros and cons, so a pro for doing nothing is that James will get to continue his path of success, but a con would be the AP is reprimanded and James is not given a second chance. If he charges both of them, he's following the rules like I mentioned before. However, if he does charge both, it shows an unwillingness to take context into situations that aren't always so black and white. In terms of creating a new policy on his own, a pro would be a willingness to look ahead to the future with things that are backed by research. It gives David a chance to improve his behavior, and James again can continue his success in education. A con of that, however, though, is district supervisors and people higher up in the district, such as the district director of secondary education, may feel very strongly about him, this assistant principal, going completely against what has been established, especially because he has only been there for 1 year. Another option is to ask the superintendent. It shows the superintendent that you care about students' well-being and shows a strong moral compass, but the superintendent may wonder why this is coming up so early in your career, and it may look like the AP is going behind the back of the director of secondary ed. Finally, one of the last options is to go to the school board about their reasons for having the policy, because either the school board likely didn't even know that policy was in place, didn't know the consequences of it, or just doesn't have any updated research to back up and validate their decisions. So, however, like I said, a con of that is being a first-year AP. This could come off as very rude, and they may question the AP's lack of experience in the school system as an educational leader. Overall, the best option would be kind of a mix of each of those. So David, in my mind, would still receive the punishment of 45 days in the district alternative education program, especially as there is clear parent support and he has a track record of these. It's not just a one-off time. He's been doing it consistently. James would be let off the hook since he was coerced and forced into this situation and did not want to be any part of it. The next step would be to sit down with building leaders and, based off of past research and studies, craft a new policy to override or in tandem work along with the zero tolerance policy. There should still be severe consequences for those with weapons, but should still allow flexibility, context, and all information before a final harsh decision is made. You would end up having to receive the official reprimand in the file, but this does bring to the attention of the superintendent. You can bring this to the attention of other district leaders and hear their perspective about why this happened or what you can do about it. In terms of implementing, there are 8 basic steps. If it worked out perfectly, you would fill out the paperwork on David, follow the school procedure, but continue to build relationships with him, inform David's parents, speak with James and let him know that he is not being punished, but encourage him to speak to a counselor about standing up for himself and how that's a life skill that he's going to have to learn, informing James's mother, calling a meeting with the building leadership, bringing research, asking for their input. Step number 6, creating this new policy with inclusive language. Step number 7, accepting the official reprimand. Step number 8, going to the superintendent or school board and asking for their input on the situation. If that really doesn't seem to be working out, you can still follow steps 1 through 4 and then go directly to the school board with concerns about the harms of a zero tolerance policy and what it has on students. So, in reflection, this case study was one that tied in ethical principles and legal issues. Unfortunately, those rarely coexist in harmony. If a school leader is following the legal component, they likely end up compromising their moral compass as well. And this is probably not a situation that was pulled out of thin air, and I'm sure this happens very regularly at schools with a zero tolerance policy. So finding the best solution is one that really does take time and context and understanding and different perspectives from lots of different people. So being able to successfully evaluate and analyze these ethical dilemmas is the key to any successful building leader. And further advocacy of revision of outdated policies is key to this system that is looking ahead to the future. Obviously, if you're just stuck in the same policies year after year and there's no real reason for it, that's probably a sign that there's some forward progress that really should be happening. And this is essentially the one source beside the case study that I used in my citation. So that is my case study. Thank you all so much for listening. Bye-bye.